Reading 39 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 2. Birdlip, September 30th, 1944. What the work teaches about war. This is an important paper. Many questions are asked about how the work regards war, and particularly this war. People say, "What is war? Why should war be?" Or they say, "Does God will war?" And, if God wills war, can he be a God? In fact, many people who have some magnetic center, some power of seeing differences in the quality of things, some power of spiritual thinking rather than physical thinking, become overwhelmed by the increasing horrors of war. Some people asked, at the beginning of this war, why it happened, what was the reason for it, and so on. He said, all of you in this work must try to understand why war exists. He constantly taught that the most powerful force that we can create in ourselves is understanding. He said, this work gives us knowledge about our situation on this earth, and understanding means to understand the knowledge that we are given about our situation on earth. However, most people think that understanding can be gained simply from their ordinary knowledge and do not realize that in order to understand, new knowledge is necessary, and that this new knowledge must combine with our being in order to create new understanding. Now, the first thing that is said in this connection is that the will of the Absolute does not reach this earth directly. If you like, you can call the Absolute God in the supreme sense. Only the work does not use this term. The ray of creation explains how the will of the Absolute, or the Supreme God, passes downwards in successive stages of creation through the action of the law of three, the law of three forces, continually replicating itself. As you know, on this earth, in terms of the particular ray of creation to which we belong, we are under 48 orders of laws. The will of the Absolute, according to this teaching, can only reach us in the form of 48 orders of laws. The will of the Absolute cannot reach us directly. It was said once at a very early meeting that if the will of the Absolute intervened, the direct result would be that the whole of creation would be smashed and destroyed. Once talking about this, said, "It is like a card game. If you alter the rules of the card game, then there is no game." This is the central idea that we must start from in thinking about why war and all its horrors exist on this planet, very low down in the scheme of creation. And here you must remember that the work teaches that we must try to put ourselves under the laws that operate from higher levels in the ray of creation. This is the first point. The second point is that the work teaches that all war is caused by extraterrestrial forces, coming most immediately from the movements of the planets. On one occasion, O asked G, what was the cause of war? And G said, it is something like this. Two planets approach each other rather closely and produce a tension which reflects itself on the earth and may go on for many years in regard to human time. From this remark of G's, O understood that time was different on different scales. Planetary time may be momentary to the planets, but a long time to humanity on this earth. O then asked G how man could prevent these extraterrestrial tensions from acting on him in the way they did. G said that these tensions affected man because he was not yet properly developed, not yet fully conscious, and that if man were conscious, these tensions would produce quite different results, and instead of producing a destructive course of events, would produce a quite different course. What would be the result of an increased tension between planets if it were more consciously taken? This inner tension, whether it be due to planets or things happening on the level of the sun, would act on man working more consciously by increasing his consciousness, and would make him more awake instead of making him more asleep, more violent, more destructive. As you know, the object of this work is to make it possible for our ordinary centers to receive higher centers in the right way, as we are now. If we receive force directly from higher centers, which would be comparable to receiving millions of volts suddenly, we should either go mad or get very violent or have epileptic fits, or become 1,000 times more negative, more full of hatred and desire to kill. Because man is asleep, the work teaches that he cannot receive force for his awakening unless he works on himself for a long time, and so prevents any increase of force that comes to him from turning into more negative states and violence. All esoteric teaching is about this preparation of lower centers and working on them for the reception of higher centers from higher up in the ray of creation. The third point is that although man is part of organic life on the surface of the earth, which is created in order to give a transmitting shock between the notes fa and mi in the ray of creation, so as to pass influences down from the higher parts of the ray to the terminal buds, which are the moons, it is no longer necessary for him at this stage to serve under the slavery. G said that just at this period, it was possible for mankind no longer to be slaves to this pain factory on the earth called organic life, through whose sufferings the lower parts of the ray are nourished, including our moon, which is gradually developing in terms of planetary time. He said that if man would only become more conscious, his slavery might end, but that owing to habits formed through centuries, habits of feeling, habits of thinking, attitudes, etc., it looked as though man would continue to serve a purpose that was no longer necessary. The problem is, he said in so many words, that man has reached a stage in which he can become more conscious, and if he did so, everything would change. But because of traditions, prejudices, because, in short, of his mechanicalness, he cannot reach this point, and so is going downhill just at the moment in which he might give a shock to himself and pass into a new world order. Unquote. Asked whether this development of totalitarianism were a step in the right direction, he said, quote, "No, quite the contrary. Man is simply putting himself under more slavery by these collective movements. The development of consciousness is an individual development. And as I have said frequently, when war comes, man throws away even the small amount of consciousness that he normally possesses. In fact, he becomes quite insane and does not see his insanity. Consciousness is weighed and measured, and there is only a certain quantity of it. But there is enough of this force of consciousness to change everything on the earth if people would only use it." End quote. Asked what he thought about the future, G said that people were going in the direction of decreased consciousness and would form either colonies of bees or colonies of ants. He said on another occasion, "Well, you have your choice. Would you be bees or would you be ants? End quote. The fourth point is that man is at a certain place in the octave of his own development, between the notes mi and fa. O suggested that we might think of this in the following terms. Starting in the ascending octave from do, he said, we might regard a single individual as do, a family group as re, and a nation as the note mi. As you know, between mi and fa, it is necessary for a shock to be given. All our ordinary life consists of broken octaves, of the order of do, re, mi, over and over again. O continued, to get to the note fa with regard to mankind, while man must retain his individual feeling at the note do, his family and responsible feeling at the note re, his national feeling at the note mi, he must pass to a new feeling at the note fa, in which he can feel the existence of other nations. He said, right creation of international feeling, the note fa, must always depend upon the three previous notes being sounded, do, re, mi, and finally fa. The artificial attempts to sound the note fa, which we might call international consciousness, are being made at the expense of the notes do, re, mi. That is to say, people are being asked to be entirely collective and to sacrifice their individuality for collective organizations. End quote. People throw away even the consciousness to which they have a right when they unite in enormous masses, as in revolutions, wars, etc. This is collectivism. A man must isolate himself from these collective forces inwardly before he can even hope to feel the magic touch of the individuality awaiting him at a higher level. Although he has to isolate himself inwardly, he has to play a collective part as a good householder without identifying with it. Let me remind you again of the definition of a good householder as a person who, whether man or woman, does his or her duty and feels responsibility in regard to life, but does not believe in life. This does not mean that a good householder believes in anything else. The integrity of the world at present and in the future depends on the number of good householders that exist in every nation. As you know, there are certain theories arising at present to the effect that man is made for the Sabbath. The present war is really between those who think that man is made for the Sabbath and those who think that the Sabbath is made for man. This is the real formulation of the present conflict. Ants and bees think that man is made for the Sabbath, for the state, and you can see what has happened to them. All this present situation was formulated 2,000 years ago in that form of esotericism, which is transmitted in the Gospels in the teaching of a conscious man who said, when he healed a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath and was accused for so doing, quote, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, end quote. The hand means power of doing, and to have a withered hand was to have no power of individual action. Do you not think there is some very deep connection here? Do you not think that if the view that man was made for the Sabbath gains ground, every man's hand will become withered? If you sound the note fa wrongly, you will have a situation produced in which individuals have to sacrifice everything for the sake of a world of internationalism. All development of consciousness must take place through definite stages, each of which must remain as a note sounding in the individual development. The attempt to increase consciousness by such forms of international groups will only make man more and more collective and less individual. It is quite true to say patriotism is not enough. But if internationalism does away entirely with patriotism, you will get the wrong octave. The consciousness will not develop in the right way, and we will go in the direction of the bees or the ants, who have given up all sense of individuality and have become simply state insects, lacking consciousness and hating other ant heaps or hives. Let us represent the octave that O suggested in the following terms. You will see that each note must depend on the strength of the sounding of the lower note. Unless Do, which is the individual person, sounds strongly enough, man will lose all individuality in the sounding of the note Mi, which is the state. What we are fighting for really is not, in my opinion, expressed by the word democracy, but in the sounding of these different notes, Do, Re, Mi, in their right harmony, as it were, with the possibility of sounding the note Fa, international consciousness and feeling, without loss of the other three notes. The fifth idea of this work is that man is created a self-developing organism and can reach a higher level of being by right knowledge and work. This perhaps is the most central idea of all. Man is inferior to himself as he is, asleep in the world and serving nature, the necessities of the great ray, which uses man as part of organic life for its own purposes. Here, people must study the origin of organic life as a side octave from the level of the sun. Man asleep, man mechanical, is used. But he is created not to be used. So, if he makes an individual effort to awaken and separate from personality, but he must be helped by esoteric teaching. All this part requires long and deep thinking over many years. Now I will add one more thing. If essence could remember, war would cease. When essence is reborn in recurrence, it chooses the same situation, the same part of time, and everything will be the same if it has not grown. All development in the work sense is the development of essence, and this always remembers. Of course, collective war can scarcely make people remember because collective war is a manifestation of personality. State war is obviously a manifestation of a collective personality. However, some people in their war experiences may remember. All people who are killed in this war are being born again in the past, and some may remember next time. This means that in recurrence, people may remember and so change the future, that when they come to 1938, say, they will remember. But if they have fought spuriously, if they have never deeply thought about what they are doing and understood it, they will do it all over again. All progress in humanity depends on those who remember, those who, recurring again in the past, remember what happened before in the future.